Okay, welcome to the podcast, The Scriptures Are Real. I'm your host, Kerry Muhlstein. And on this podcast, we focus on making the Scriptures come to life for us. We just talk with people about little things that they've learned that have helped them make the stories of the Scripture, or the people of the Scriptures, real to them. And then the Scriptures are more powerful. That's a lasting testimony of the truth and the power of the Scriptures. And we believe that a lot of good can come out of this. Today, I'm really excited for my guest. My guest is Trevan Hatch, who's a longtime friend of mine, and he is he's a librarian at the Harold B. Lee Library at Brigham Young University. He's the section librarian. You'll have to tell me if I've got the right title, but the section librarian for Ancient Near Eastern Studies and the Ancient Scripture Department, and maybe some other things. So tell us about yourself, Trevan, and what I haven't said correctly in that interview or that introduction.
Okay, thanks, Kerry. Yeah, it's good to be here. Yes, I'm basically what I am is a research specialist in the library, and my title is some big long thing. It's ancient scripture, Middle East, ancient Near Eastern studies, anthropology, which includes archaeology. Those are the subjects that I deal with. So I'm like all those things, and then I'm the subject specialist of those things. So I pretty much spend most of my time helping students with research, faculty with their research, and doing my own research. So it really is the best kept secret in academics to work as an academic librarian. I love it.
Yeah. The fact that you get to both teach and spend all that time researching and helping other people research, I've often been jealous of your position. It's a fantastic.
Fun, yeah.
Why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background, both your academic background and just your personal background?
Okay. I was born and raised a Utah boy, and I came to a couple miles from BYU. Went to all the sports camps and everything. And then I came to BYU and got a degree in ancient Near Eastern studies and history. And I was in a fast track to Hebrew Testament, but I got kind of scared because getting a job as a Latter-day Saint in biblical studies outside of BYU is difficult. Maybe it's a conversation that somebody could have on the podcast of why that's the case and how it impacts our ability to deal with the outside world in biblical exegesis. But the reason why, so when I got scared, I jumped ship from classically trained biblical studies into Jewish studies. I thought it was more broad. I thought it was more practical, but it was absolutely not. But I thought it was at the time. So I got a master's degree in Jewish studies with an emphasis in early Jewish and rabbinic literature. So during the time of Christ and a few centuries after. And then for a number of reasons, I launched into 2 doctoral programs in the years following at LSU down in Baton Rouge in what is basically sociology of religion. Wrote a dissertation on American Jews. And the other doctoral degree is in Jewish studies, early Judaism, biblical studies. I've been working on that for 8 years, and now I'm finally getting to my dissertation phase. So it's been fun academic ride to learn how to read the New Testament and in the Old Testament from Jews. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, you have a book out, Stranger in Jerusalem, that I think does a fantastic job of helping us understand the messianic expectations of Jews in Jesus' day, and just that setting of Judaism that Christ grows up in. I mean, he grows up an observant Jew, and I think we often don't think of him that way. He doesn't just grow up; he spends his entire life as an observant Jew, and it helps us to understand that world, to understand the New Testament. So that's also some great stuff that you do.
Yeah. I think it's a fun book to write. I did that in 2019, and my students absolutely love it because we talk about questions that are non-typical. And we can even talk about some of them today, but it's, questions as a social scientist who also does biblical studies. The research questions that I ask are like, how does the power structures associate with the peasant class, and a lot of those issues, and how long did people live, and what were the diseases they had, what did they eat, and how did that affect their life, their way of life, their fatigue, all that kind of stuff. So it's similar to what archaeologists do, similar type of data. I'm not an archaeologist, but those questions are really fun to ask. And to a related issue, and this is one of the topics that I love to study. I mean, for me, it's like daily life, the Messiah or messianic expectations, and then the Pharisees. And that's a big discussion. But even it's like with the Messiah, you have this, in 2 Samuel, we read where God tells David. And then you also have all throughout, you have Numbers, you have Genesis, you have these different books that kind of hint at this future figure who's going to come out of Jacob or come out of Israel. And it's going to be a star, right? Come out of Jacob and to rule the world. But by the time we get to 2 Samuel, we then get some more specifics, and we get this promise where God tells David that his posterity, his Davidic line will produce a messianic king, or a Davidic king, will be everlasting. And then the Hebrew prophets take this, and a lot of people are waiting, especially after the exile. Is there going to be a new Jerusalem rebuilt? It's going to be led by this messianic king. And all throughout the Hebrew prophets and the Israelite literature, you can start to see those poor, the poor and the oppressed, and that ideal have to be taken care of before the Messiah comes. It's not just this nice city that's going to rule the world and bring in Messiah, that there has to be certain things that have to be done, certain conditions, and taking care of the poorest among you is one of them. And so when the later you get in Israelite history, and the closer you get into the Persian period, and right on the eve of the Greeks coming, you have increased, I think you can see it in the text where there's this increased expectation, a sort of anxiety about this future messianic king, and when is he coming to save us? And by the time you get to Jesus, like we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, we've gone through those texts, people have gone through them and looked at all the different messianic expectations. This is what people expected the Messiah to accomplish. And this is really to stop oppression, to overthrow corrupt governments, to establish a new sort of like Eden, an Edenic paradise, this is paradise like Eden, to restore it to that. And man, by the time Jesus comes, you've had Greeks and you've had Romans, not to mention the lifestyle, the daily life that we talked about. And there's this oppression on all sides and corruption. Even the Jewish high priest, that office was bought with the highest bidder. And so that was corrupted. And that was corrupted. And so now you have, by the time Jesus comes in his generation, you have the messianic expectations have reached a fever pitch. And this is the perfect setting where now Jesus comes in, and you've got, and he's also seems to be uncomfortable with this message of a Messiah. Not that he disowns, he just says, be careful, be careful with your language. In John, read about people wanting to make Jesus king. And so he escapes from there. But all of this is wrapped into this narrative of how sort of a Zion is built. And it starts with helping the least among us.
That's very good. And I think that idea of the oppression and foreigners kind of plays in some stories in ways we often don't think about. So, for example, someone might wonder, why do they keep rebelling against Assyria when Assyria has beaten them so badly? Or why are they rebelling against Babylon when Babylon's beaten them so badly? Well, it's because they're exacting a tribute of both goods and people. And it gets pretty hard after a while when you are already struggling to get by, to then have so much of your goods taken, and to see your sons and daughters taken to be slaves or in the army or the military and so on. And then that's not only the loss of people you love, but loss of people who are helping you survive. And it becomes unbearable to where you just think, I can't make it. Even if we die in an army, that's not going to, or in a battle, that's not going to be different than me dying from starvation. And of course, that's one of the problems with publicans in Jewish society under the Romans, right? Because they're seen as part of the group that is taking an inordinate amount from people who are barely surviving anyway. And so all of that comes to play in these stories.
Yeah, and if I guess if I would tell people, like in my ward, if I was teaching gospel doctrine, or people listening to this podcast, I would say sometimes the Old Testament gets a little bit tedious. Depends on how you're approaching it. Sometimes you're thinking, man, this is, in fact, one woman in my previous ward when I lived in Santaquin, she says, I never read the Old Testament with my kids because it was so messed up, as the words she used. And I think one way to approach the Old Testament is to try to see it through, try to put, daily, put you in that setting and think about the things that we've talked about, and try to put yourselves in those who see a different perspective. And it's a really fun exercise. And I do this with my students here on, let's be Laman and Lemuel. Okay, what were they so mad at?
Yeah.
There's a certain area, obviously there's things that they did that are improper, but they see from their perspective, they have Lehi and Nephi taking them out. into the wilderness with these other crazy, the Rechabites that we read about in Jeremiah, these crazy people who are mad at the king, so they want to go live in tents and build up their own kingdom. And so they're like, what in the Jerusalem can't fall? We saw it survive the Assyrians, and so you guys are crazy.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a little bit of empathy, even for people who we would normally say, they are dirty, rotten, evil people. But I try to do that. I put myself in the shoes of Judas. What was he thinking? What are some alternate options for interpretation than just some guy who was just like, yeah, I'm gonna sell out and sell Jesus off for the price of again, a bottle of ointment. Or I try to put myself in the shoes of the Pharisees, like, what's their deal? What do they really want? As opposed to just bloodthirsty people who want to stone everybody. It's a little bit more complicated than that. What was Samuel thinking? And this is it's a good exercise to go through. Not that we agree with all of those people, or I mean, it depends on who you're looking at. But David had struggles.
Yeah.
Solomon had struggles. Everybody. It's David and Goliath. It's the story of David and Goliath. We usually get that message, and with our seminary kids, and even in Come Follow Me, it tends to kind of go towards what is your Goliath in life, and with the Lord anything's possible, and that's certainly a worthwhile message. But when we think of that time period and we look at the text, what the texts are trying to do, you've got this teenager David who's from the tribe of Judah, and they're familiar with these different prophecies. And then you've got Saul, who's from the tribe of Benjamin. So you've got these different tribes, and they've got probably some rivalries among them. In fact, we know that from the book of Judges, when all the ancient Israelites were furious at the tribe of Benjamin for allowing horrible things to happen, and they were going to sort of exterminate them.
Right.
So anyway, so there's these.
That's part of the messed up part of the Bible. We can talk about that later. But yeah, that's in one of the most messed up stories of the Bible. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, very, very difficult. And so you get this story where you've got war. And okay, what are the practices of war? Well, you set up your best military fighter versus our best military fighter, right? Because we believe that our God is better than your God, and why kill? Why risk killing everybody? Let's just set up our best. And you've got Goliath, who is 9 feet tall, according to later texts. But then, Masoretic texts, these are texts that are post-date Jesus by about 1,000 years. But if we get back into earlier, the Bible of the Dead Sea Scroll, the Qumran sect, or the Septuagint, right, the Greek translation, he's about 6.5 feet tall, right, 4 cubits in a span. And so when I'm in Israel with people, I stand on my toes, and when I stand on my toes, I'm about 6.5 feet tall. And I say, okay, I'm bigger than most people who are average height of about 5'5", typical male in the.
Yeah, they were smaller then.
Yeah, 5'5", and so you get people 5'1", 5'2", 5'3", looking up at a 6.5 feet tall Goliath. But what's interesting is we look in the text is Saul. It says he's a head taller than any man, and he's handsome, and he's the king. So the story is saying he should have been the one fighting Goliath. And so when David comes, the story is this fascinating, complex story where David says, okay, I'm going to step into the place of the king. So it's this kind of showing you how the power went from Saul and the tribe of Benjamin to David and the tribe of Judah, to show how this the prophecies are fulfilling. But David puts on the armor. No, I don't like this. So I'm going to take up a sling, which was the choice. We learn in Chronicles and in Judges, this is the choice weapon of the Benjamites. They were excellent, slingers. And so here's David picking up the choice weapon of the Benjamites and slays Goliath. A lot of that stuff where combination of archaeology, combination of war tactics, rivalries between tribes, and you can bring all those elements in there, and you can really see how, what's the mindset of these different people watching your king defer to this young boy, however old he was. And I just, those are the kind of stories that I really like. I take common stories and try to look at the subtext. It really, really comes to life. I really love those kinds of stories. Yeah, I agree. And in fact, there's a ton in all of the David stories that if you look at them more carefully, you'll say, well, there's a lot of going on here that we haven't thought of, right? And David's pretty savvy in a lot of those stories. But all right, well, Trevan, thank you very much, and we hope this has been helpful for our audience. Have a great day, and remember, the scriptures are real and they're authentic, and they will help us come unto Christ and our Father in heaven. Thanks, Kerry. Thank you.